Watch more programs like this on cable and stream with PCN Select. Subscribe at PCNTV.com. This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN.
Welcome to another edition of PHRC Speaks, Fair Housing in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Adrian Garcia, Director of Fair Housing and the Commercial Property Division for the PHRC. Today, PHRC speaks through the voice of one of our valued team members. Civil rights enforcement is not for the faint of heart. You must want to do it despite the challenges that exist daily. Even though many would like to ignore the social justice issues that arise and those we ourselves made. Though it is true that many of us were not responsible for enacting and enforcing discriminatory housing policies initially, we bear the responsibility for the enduring harm of those policies by not voting or voting against the interests that would lead to the elimination of those policies. Because of this, civil rights enforcement and agencies like the PHRC are important today more than ever. According to the National Fair Housing Alliance, there were 28,712 fair housing complaints received by private nonprofit fair housing organizations in 2020, which represents only a small portion of the estimated 4 million incidents of housing discrimination that occur each year. So we'll be interviewing a PHRC team member today that has established herself as a leader in the housing enforcement space. Gloria Richardson attended the University of South Carolina, where she received a degree in insurance and economic development. She has since held many leadership roles within the insurance industry, from adjuster to underwriter in sales and training for major national insurance brands. She joined the PHRC in 2019 as an intake specialist and transitioned to compliance investigator. In January 2023, she became housing compliance supervisor. Welcome, Gloria, to PHRC Speaks. It's so nice to have you here.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay. Can you tell us a little about your social justice journey?
Right. I think I spoke in the past that my parents were very big on civil rights and making sure we understood our civil rights. Making sure that we were learned in the fight for civil rights, and moving forward that we stood up for those things and stood up for the things that were right. So I appreciate what my parents gave me in that space to make me strong and understand the fight that folks had fought before I ever came along, and that I should continue that journey to fight for others that may not be able to fight for themselves.
Did you always know that this is kind of where your path was going?
I don't know that I knew that my career might go there, but I knew that I would do that. I've always been a proponent for voting and getting out there and talking to people about their rights and standing up for the right things. So I knew I would be in that area for my entire life. I don't know that I knew my career would go there.
Sure. Now, you started with the PHRC as an intake specialist. Tell us what that position entailed. Many of our viewers wouldn't know what that is.
Okay. In intake, if someone calls the PHRC today and says, I have an issue, I have a problem, I think I'm being discriminated against, whether it be in housing, education, employment, public accommodation, that first setup of an appointment is with an intake specialist. That person is there to listen solely and focus on that customer to see if they have a case where they feel like their rights have been violated. Now, the most important thing is that it's something that's covered by our act. So sometimes we have to tell them it's not, but on a large majority of times, people have something that needs to at least be further investigated. And that intake specialist is there to listen to their story, to put it down in a manner in a complaint format, and then send it to them to sign so that it can be served, and we'll express that a little bit later, can be served out so investigation can get that case and investigate it further.
Now, as an intake specialist, you're one of the first people that people are going to talk to. So potential filing party is going to talk to you, and they're usually not in the best place emotionally. So how did you manage that emotional element that was part of the conversation?
I recently heard a phrase that said, "No one calls the commission happy." Okay? So you've got to realize you're probably speaking to them in one of their worst times in their life. Something has happened to them that's traumatic. So it's important to sit back, listen a little bit, and then make them understand that you are there for them to listen to, and then you're going to give them the advice, the acknowledged advice of what we can do, what we can, what we can't do, maybe even provide them with some other avenues to pursue. But you're here to listen to them and tell them whether or not you can draft them, as in this case, write them, a complaint that needs to be investigated. You become their writer of their story. And so they're giving you that story so you can write it, and then you're going to provide it to them and say, did I get this right by you? No. And they'll sign that, and then we can move forward and investigate it.
Now, some people believe that enforcement agencies like the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission act on behalf of those that file complaints. Okay. What do you say to that?
In the intake stage, I would largely say that probably is the case, because at that point, we're only listening to the person filing the complaint. We are a one-sided body. We are listening to them. We don't call anybody. We don't ask for anything. We're just trying to see, do you have a case, and we refer to it as a prima facie case under the law. Do you have a prima facie case that at least determines that it needs some investigation? Once that person signs that complaint, and then we do a service, and we'll explain that in a little bit. If they do a service, once it moves into the investigative phase, we are no longer a one-sided party. We then move to a neutral party. So I can see where someone on the opposite side might say, well, but you've already talked to them. You're the ones who drafted this complaint. So why can't I see you as being on their side? Well, that's why it goes from an intake person to an investigative person. That person can then become neutral. They're hearing both sides for the first time.
Right. So can you give our viewers a basic meat and potatoes definition of the two parties involved in a complaint?
Yes. Okay. When I say when the complaint is filed, the person filing the complaint is the complainant. That is the person who called in and said, I need help. I feel like I'm being discriminated against. When we send that answer out to the party that they feel discriminated against, they're required to give us a response. They are referred to as the respondent because they have to give us a response called an answer to that complaint. So those are the two parties that are involved in this complaint, and the investigator will be in the middle of that. Okay.
I'm going to double back a little bit, just kind of, because I want to revisit the initial complaint or the initial interview process. And so you mentioned that, you're taking down the complaint, but you mentioned the term prima facie case. So what is it that you're looking for that makes you as an intake specialist decide, yes, this is a case that we can certainly write up, that we can certainly accept as an agency?
Okay. So under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, we had the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. And under that act, it governs what we can and cannot take under discrimination. So therefore, when we're listening to that complainant's story of what happened to them, does it fit under our act? If it's saying, this morning, a gentleman said, my housing, and I'm being evicted, and then you go to what's the reason? Because he's got the first two parts. He's a complainant, he's being evicted. Now it goes to the reason that he's evicted. And are all three of those parts covered under our act? So right now we know the first two are. Now what's the reason that he feels like he's being evicted? And if that fits, it makes it prima facie. So it's just got to fit within our act, or If he tells us an event that doesn't fit in our act, maybe I have to give him some other resources that he can pursue, because we're only covered by that act. And that's how we have to govern whether or not it's a complaint that fits for us.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between your intake responsibilities and the investigative responsibilities? Take us through that.
All right. I think at some point the complainant has become comfortable with us because we've drafted this complaint for them. And they have had this wonderful conversation, hopefully, with the intake person. And then when it goes over to investigation, the investigator, the case will be served out to the respondent. And at that point, that investigator is going to ask the complainant a number of more deep, serious questions than intake did. They're going to start asking for documentation and information, potential witnesses. And the person might say, well, don't you just take my word for it? Because intake took my word for it. And at this point, the investigator might say, I am a neutral fact finder. I'm trying to recover facts from you. I'm trying to recover facts from the other side so that we can make the best informed decision under the law. And they must express, I am also asking these questions of the other side. So I am trying to get both of those, a degree of facts layered onto each other so we can make a decision whether or not discrimination occurred in this particular case.
So you're kind of setting expectations, and that was my next question. You know, how do you set the expectation for the complainant in terms of what the relationship with you will be like during the investigation?
Right.
I mean, do they understand that you're not their attorney, or what's the conversation like?
Oftentimes, a complainant will think, because you've talked about legal documents and everything else, they will think that you're their attorney. And you have to express that you're not their attorney. Yes, are you going to be helpful with them? Or are you going to be informative to them? But you also need to explain and express to them that you are there to investigate whether discrimination happened in this one, and you are going to be respectful of both sides and neutral. And it is only at this point that you will stay neutral until a decision is made on whether or not it's discrimination.
Yeah. So, and how does that conversation usually go? I mean, what is the acceptance rate of that explanation?
Up front, I will actually say 60 to 70% of people up front, if you catch them earlier when it first comes to the investigator, explain to them how the investigation is going to go and that you're neutral at that point, most people will understand that. And you express kind of some of the things that you might have to do in the investigation. For example, any witnesses, any text messages, go ahead and ask them up front for their documentation so that they know you're taking the things from them into effect. If they see that their witnesses are being called, that their documents have been put forward to them, and maybe you've read them and have further questions to them about that. So they see that you're invested in their information in the investigation, and you're not going to be to the other side. And the same happens with the respondent. Once the respondent puts that answer in, you may be asking for additional information from them because you're trying to corroborate information on one side or the other.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So what would you say to viewers that might find themselves having to respond to a complaint?
Okay. With the PHRC, we have an interest in. We want the respondent to respond. We want you to put an answer in. This is not a game that we're trying to play of, hey, we've served you and we don't want to get that answer in. We want it in from you. So we are usually very happy and very helpful in the housing special. We will hold that hand on the other side and show them, here's tools of how to answer that complaint. We send that. We answer questions for them. Again, that's party to being neutral in the middle. It's trying to make sure both sides come to the table and we can get this investigation done properly.
And there's that word again, that neutral. I mean, you mentioned that before, that you're neutral fact finding. Is there a point where that neutrality ends?
Yes, it is. At the end of that investigation, if we have determined that it is a probable cause finding, meaning we found more than likely that the complainant has been discriminated against, at that point, we are no longer neutral. we are all in for fighting for that complainant and to get them justice.
Right.
Okay.
And so, along that vein, the justice that we're seeking, what does that entail? What are some of the remedies that they can get?
Okay. I think justice first starts with, and we always ask, we call it damage mitigation. But we ask the complainant, how have you been damaged? And that's an important step because something could happen to me and something could happen to you, and we could be damaged in two different ways. So it's important to sit down with that complainant and find out how they've been damaged. That person may not want what I would have wanted out of the case. So we got to find out what they want and whether or not it's something that we can reasonably go after for them. So we start with them and say, okay, how did this discrimination harm you? Did you have a financial loss? Did you have an emotional loss? How did it affect you? Did you lose your housing? Did you have to get new housing? What did that entail? Did you have to live at a hotel? Did you have to pay a family member? What did those harms entail, and what did it lead to in your life? And how do we come to some figure or fact to address that? And it may be financial, maybe training, it may be a multitude of things. I've seen people ask for upfront money for their next place to move. I'm still here, discrimination, but I just want to move. I want this deal brokered that I can move. It's what that person needs in the moment, and how can we broker that to get them into their next stage of life.
But Supervisor Richardson, I want $1 million. Can you get me $1 million? Have you had that experience?
Oh yes, and I'm going to go back to a word I mentioned: reasonable. Right. It is a wonderful thing to want $1 million. And growing up, my mother would have said, "You got goals there." But I can only get you what's reasonable, and it is my job, again, in that role as the investigator, to talk to them about reasonability, because it may be that I can get the complainant to come to a reasonable area so I can get the respondent there. If not, then that's going to be something, if we can't determine it, it's going to be something that's going to probably be inside of our jurisdictional wing of the PHRC.
All right, so talk to us a little bit about the complaint process. You mentioned that you get the intake, and then it goes into investigation, and it could settle. But let's say it doesn't settle. What happens then?
Okay. If it is been ruled probable cause by the commission, then what we're going to do, and if they don't settle, we're going to set it up for something called public hearing. And again, this benefits the complainant if they don't have an attorney, because then the commission attorney is going to defend your case for you. So in this case, when they really thought way back when that we were their attorney, we finally turn into their attorney, okay? And so this case will be brought in front of the commission to be heard. It will be argued by the commission attorney for your behalf. The respondent can come either on their own or with their own attorney, and this will be heard just as if you have gone to trial. Mm-hmm. And there will be a ruling out of that. And all the things that you have bought for before in your investigation, all of that will be provided to our attorney to argue the case. Our attorney will meet with you one-on-one and help to develop that case even further for the hearing, because they're in the interest of winning that case for you.
Right. So
that is another service that the commission provides that people don't realize this occurs, but it's got to be on a probable cause finding.
Right. So not until, that's again where that neutrality goes away, exactly, is when that probable cause is found. Right. And so just to kind of set it up visually, mm-hmm, is the hearing like a trial, like you've got somebody listening and then you've got the two parties arguing the case and closing argument and the whole 9 yards?
You will actually be in front of a hearing examiner who will be the judge of your case. So yes, it is her, and like I said, you're probably going to end up maybe testifying potentially, but our attorney is going to be there to walk you through that. They're going to hold your hand in that situation, just as in some cases your intake person held your hand. Okay. So that person has a vested interest in that they found your case to be probable cause, and they're arguing it passionately to win in your favor.
Now, let's talk a little bit about how you've now transitioned to a leadership role. So, as a leader within the PHRC's family, what do you hope to accomplish as a housing supervisor?
Okay. When I came to housing, at first as an intake person and as a rep, I feel like how far we were behind. And I think I was able as a rep to advance it and to get things faster and improving those. And that, as the supervisor, is also my goal. My goal is to make sure that when someone shows up at this door and asks for an investigation, we can get faster and faster at getting in, doing that quality investigation, and getting you an answer. I don't want things to linger behind, and that's what I want to do. I want them to know when they say, oh, we come to the PHRC on housing, we're going to get something and get some information, get an investigation done, and whatever justice is needed done in a timely manner.
And so how do you do that with a staff that you may have some new staff, you may have some people that have a lot of institutional knowledge that have been here for years. How do you lead that change or that effort for efficacy?
Okay. In the Harrisburg office, as you know, I have two reps. One is less experienced than the other one. The one is tenure. But those same reps need some of the same things. They need one-on-one time with their supervisor, and they need to be able to go do what they need to do, but when they need their questions answered, they need their supervisor there. And they need to be there to say, okay, how are we going to put our heads together and come to a either common solution for this or best investigated plan to get this done. And so I find that it's really helpful for me is that every day I'm talking to usually both housing reps. And we're talking about cases, and we're planning for the next day of the next case that we're going to be talking about, and we're going forward like that. So it is, I have two good people that are willing to do the work that is in this arena that comes to their table. They want to do it well. So that is a big part of it. It's the want to do it well, to solve it, and they are going out every day. So today, Teddy settled 2 cases today.
Wow.
And, so he's out delivering checks to people where he's got them the justice on their cases.
That's great. And I do want to take this time because we do work together,
right.
and acknowledge the fact that you have brought some great elements to as a representative, the way you organize your cases, and we shared that across the Commonwealth with all of our investigators. So I do want to acknowledge the fact that you bring some skills.
I try.
There's no joke in that. You do bring some skills.
Yes.
So let me ask you this. What is the most rewarding part of your job? Or even better yet, what keeps you inspired in this career?
It's the reps. And I know that it sounds fun, but it's the customer out there you can do justice for, but it's also starting these young minds off in their start in the civil rights fight.
Right.
Because it's great if we're all in the fight and we've been there, but guess what? You need another generation and another generation and another generation. So you need young people to be enthused about the civil rights fight. And if we can train them about what's going on in the fight and then how to investigate it, they'll spread that. Not just to themselves, their friends, their family members. More people get into the fight by spreading it and getting that information. Most of the time when you meet people, they just don't know the information. And so what's the old saying? Information is knowledge, is wealth.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
Right.
And so, but there's still something in there that's a fire that you're carrying. Mm-hmm. I mean, you talked a little bit about it in your upbringing.
Right.
Because, and I mention this because it takes a special person, even in light of the way things are and what we see on a day-to-day basis playing out in front of the media, some of the injustices that occur in housing and public spaces and university. Is it hard to keep focused when you see that it's really uphill?
I would say when I was younger, I would have thought we'd be more advanced than where we are. But one of the things I've learned during that time is it always seems like we take a step forward and we take 2 steps back. So we got to keep climbing that hill. That was probably the hardest thing to learn in this, is that we're like, aren't we over that hill yet? And we're just not. And so I think it takes that in passion. I don't wish that on anybody. I think I've seen discrimination in my childhood, through my parents, through my upbringings of things that have happened. I don't want that to happen to other people. And I will stand and fight for that, for them to not. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there today experiencing discrimination that we don't even see. We need them to bring it to us so we can see. So that's my passion. It's, training young people to be involved in that, but also knowing that that fight is still out there. And it is a long fight. It's not going to be over with tomorrow. It's not going to be over with next week or next year. So we need to be ready for that fight.
In that respect, I think you and I are kindred spirits.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being with us on PHRC Speaks, Gloria. And we know that you're going to continue to excel for the people of the Commonwealth. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me.
I also want to thank you, the viewer, for joining us today. For more information on this topic, or if you believe that you've been a victim of discrimination in a housing transaction, you can visit us online at www.phrc.pa.gov or call us at 717-787-9780. We're also pretty easy to find online on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. That's going to do it for this edition of PHRC Speaks. Until next time, take care, be good, and be fair to each other.
This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN. To get your program on PCN Fusion and for more information, contact info@pcntv.com.